Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad for us to be gathered here today for a panel discussion on membership commitment and belonging. We'll be posting this discussion as a video that will serve as an advanced document for the plenary session that is planned on the same topic as part of a continuation of our discussion and our discernment about whether we're, as a yearly meeting, ready to consider revising our membership practices. And so we have some great panelists, all with different kinds of experience and perspective to dig into some of the topics in kind of a spirit of worship podcast style fishbowl situation. I'm going to introduce each panelist and have you wave so we know who you are. So we have Tunisia or Ten Henson, who was one of the co-facilitators, hi Tunisia, of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting's January threshing session on membership. And we have Emma Lapsansky, who is a Haverford College Emeritus Professor of History and Quaker historian, joining us. We have Marissa Badgley, who hails from New York Yearly Meeting and serves as interim Young Adult Friends Field Secretary there. We have Katherine Campbell, Philadelphia Yearly Meeting Young Adult Friends co-clerk. Welcome, Katherine. We have Mike Huber, who serves as Quaker Voluntary Services Program Director and is also a co-clerk of Sierra Cascades Yearly Meeting. We have Martha Bryans with us, who is a former clerk of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting and also former clerk, right, of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting's Faith and Practice Revision Committee, as well as many other things. And we have Howard Sell, who was also a member of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting's Faith and Practice Revision Committee. And we've published longer bios for each panelist with the posting of this video that folks can check out. So over the past 15 years or more, there's been some discernment in our yearly meeting and in the wider Religious Society of Friends about membership. And it spanned a variety of concerns. Some of them were about, as we focused more on wanting to engage young adults in the life of the yearly meeting, there has been and continues to be a question about the membership requirements for serving in governance, kind of being out of sync with where young adults are. And then I think that's sort of in some ways where the discernment began. And it was deepened as we thought about that more, the question of what really is membership and how do we want to be in relationship to that question? And what does it mean to be a Quaker and what counts? And I think in recent years, that has extended not to beyond the young adult friends experience to also the experience of folks in the final third portion of their life too. Sometimes when you are in retirement and you need to move in with a family member or move to into a continuing care retirement center, which is far away from your home meeting. And so there's a question there as an older friend, what access do you have to local Quaker community? And similar questions about what counts as membership in those cases. Or if you're at any point in your life starting to identify as a Quaker or being attracted to the faith, but there's no monthly meeting near you. And then I think This also is overlapping with, as a yearly meeting, our work on racial justice and addressing racism. Um, for example, I think the Ujima Friends Peace Center is a community of Quakers who worship um, in Philadelphia, who was entirely conceived of by and are led by, and really a space for Quakers of color. But there's questions about what practices we have for how you become a monthly meeting and how that is related to becoming a member of the Religious Society of Friends, and what it would look like, for example, for Ujima Friends Peace Center. If they decided they wanted to become a monthly meeting, at this point, they would have to come under the care as a preparative meeting um, of another monthly meeting that's made of almost all white people. And what does that look like? What's that dynamic? And do we really want to have something like that? And then meanwhile, folks who really count themselves as Quakers, a part of that community, who maybe discovered Quakerism because of it, aren't technically Quakers because they can't become members because Ujima Friends Peace Center is in a monthly meeting. So many issues overlapping. I think that all have come together to make it so that we want to be in this discernment with each other. So the first thing we're going to do is invite some storytelling from a subset of our panelists. And so we'll sink back into worship, and I'll invite Tunisia for you to tell your story.
Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. So again, my name is Tunisia, or 10. I think my relationship to Philadelphia Yearly Meeting has shifted in many different ways throughout my life. My grandmother sort of had me come along with her when she began to explore Quakerism when I was a child. And that is sort of how I became introduced to Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. And from there, I began to attend middle school friends gatherings, and then young friends gatherings, and then young adult friends gatherings as I could, considering I moved to North Carolina. And so throughout my time being a part of PYM, my meeting is a Lewisburg Friends meeting, which is relatively far from Philadelphia, I would say. And it was usually pretty far from where the retreats would happen for middle school and young friends. And so I was always experiencing a bit of a distance and disconnect from the community that I was a part of with middle school friends and young adult friends. And with that disconnect, I found myself, while it was hard to be away from people who I was so deeply connected with, I was able to cherish my time and be incredibly excited to do weekend retreats and summer sessions, and almost any time that I was able to get away and go see folks who I was building true meaningful relationships with, I was ready to do that. I am having all these memories of like begging my parents and please drive me. And so with that being such a crucial part of my understanding of community, learning that in a Quaker space, learning that also with like a Quaker faith backing that up, Um, I was really drawn again to find the college that I just graduated from in Greensboro, North Carolina, Guilford College. And throughout that time, I was seeing community that I had built and knowing that I wanted to find more of that. And I was also seeing things that were happening in middle school friends and young friends for me as a young person of color showing up to predominantly white spaces. I was able to navigate those things far easier than I was in my hometown school or wherever the situation was. So I was excited to find time to be able to navigate race and class and all these things inside of the school that I was choosing. However, my move disconnected me from PYM in a bit of a different way. And I was needing to find that faith-based community building down in Greensboro. And I definitely was not open to spirit leading me to where it wanted to. I was a bit of a trailblazer, or that's not the right word, but definitely was pushing folks to, address what was happening in the world. I started at Guilford in 2017, right after the 2016 election. And I was, I think, one of 4 or 5 folks of color in the Quaker Leadership Scholars Program at Guilford. That might be a low estimate. I would say between like maybe 5 or 7 out of 20, 25 students. So it was a small group. And we're in the South, and we're navigating lots of other different dynamics happening about race. And I kept coming back to experiences I had at sessions in PYM when I, as a young person, would speak out, or was trying to navigate these things from a learned experience that I could not apply. And I was also coming to the realization that it's really hard to make change and understand what it means to be a part of a Quaker community when folks, myself included, are not prepared to have tough conversations and admit moments of being wrong and admit moments of needing to learn more. And after about 2 years a part of the Quaker community at Guilford, I left and was a bit asked to leave. And so that's sort of when I started to come back to PYM a little bit, even though it's about a 9-hour drive. And I have been realizing a lot of the ways in which my distance affects my ability to be a part of the young adult friends community. And also the ways in which my identities make it challenging for me to feel that I can openly and fully share in all the Quaker spaces that I have been a part of. And I also, my home meeting in Lewisburg is very small. And so there's the dynamics of also needing to find like my own space where I live that I can be a part of fully. But membership is also just an issue in lots of different yearly meetings, is a thing people talk about in lots of places. And so my experience with membership has been interesting and challenging, and also has brought my attention to making sure we are recognizing things on like many levels, because there are many things affecting my personal relationship to that. And when I was facilitating in January at the continuing session about membership, I was really brought back to that, of hearing so many people's testimonies about their personal relationship to membership, and how multifaceted everybody's story is, and how a response to that also needs to be catering to that multifaceted approach.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Tunisia. So let's sink back into worship, and then I'll invite Katherine to share next.
Thanks, everyone. So I am coming to this conversation as the current one of the two co-clerks of Young Adult Friends in Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. I am pretty new to the yearly meeting and to Young Adult Friends and to my monthly meeting. I moved to Philadelphia for college in fall 2016 and started attending meetings. I went to a friend's school for elementary school and felt called back to Friends, I think in high school. Started sort of loosely identifying myself as a Quaker, but I'm from a non-Quaker family, so I was really excited to move to Philadelphia and like get into a meeting as fast as possible. And I, moved around a little bit and found a place. And at the same time, I was invited to Young Adult Friends. And the first retreat I attended, I was just so struck by what an amazing spiritual community that was. And that is, Young Adult Friends is not a monthly meeting. It bears very little resemblance to one in most ways. We come together only, 4 or 5 times a year. And many people are members of monthly meetings scattered all over, and many people aren't members anywhere. We have no membership structure in Young Adult Friends, so when you show up to our retreat, to our business meeting, you're there. I am clerk just by, I have been there for a few years, and like our nominating process, we were looking through the list of people who are in the community, and like it was wonderful that it was just like, oh, this person, and there's no well, do they have a box checked anywhere, which is unusual in friend spaces. So last year, last spring, I guess, at a retreat, we had a meeting gathering with our, at that time, newly appointed presiding clerk, Chris Luca, and our coordinator had invited him to speak with us because Young Adult Friends had been concerned about the structures of membership and how they work for young adults who are often among the more transient members of the Friends world. And that concern had existed long, long before I got there. So it was a really wonderful conversation. We all shared sort of our experiences with membership, and some people had, really easily had like grown up in Quakerism and really easily found their way into a meeting and stayed there. And some people, had moved from one yearly meeting to another, or had left a yearly meeting, or had become part of the Young Adult Friends community, but never joined anywhere officially. This is in the epistle, but one YAF in the room shared a story about being at yearly business meeting sessions. And when they gave their affiliation, when they were speaking in meeting, they gave at one point their childhood meeting where they were actually recorded. And at one point the meeting they actually attend every weekend. And at one point as a young adult friend. And recording clerk sort of chased them down, was like, what's your membership? Like, well, so what is your membership? So that's what led to that conversation, and we sort of distilled the concerns that were in the room and some of the stories into that epistle, and brought it to yearly meeting sessions. And I feel that I am, in a way, not the best person to be sort of representing YAFs in the formal way, just because I am so new to the community. But I also feel that we all have our different stories with membership, and I have one too, and I'm just really glad that this process has opened the way for so many people to share those stories and to hear how complex it is for everybody. And I'm really excited to see where the yearly meeting goes.
Thanks so much, Katherine, for your story. Let's sync back in to worship and then welcome our final storyteller, Marissa.
So thank you, friends, for inviting me and welcoming me into this space. Again, my name is Marissa, and I serve New York Yearly Meeting as the interim young adult field secretary. And my work around membership extends far back in time. So in 2015, we were at our summer annual sessions in New York Yearly Meeting, and after some workshop or another, there was a small group of us hanging back, and we started talking about membership structures. And it was really interesting because there were 3 young adults in the room. All of us were birthright friends, so we all grew up within a friends meeting, and none of us felt like we had a home anywhere except for the yearly meeting. And there were a couple of other people there for whom that was definitely not their experience. And we got into this giant discussion about how whether or not monthly meetings are the core of Friends traditions, and whether we could exist without them. And whether the yearly meetings function was to solely serve monthly meetings, which would mean that there were levels of hierarchy around membership. And it was such an interesting discussion that it turned into a bunch of mealtime discussions, and then within a short period of time turned into a working group, because that's how we often function. And so this was back in 2016, and it was the beginning of New York Yearly Meetings' multi-year journey in thinking about membership and what it means and how it serves us and how it doesn't serve us and who it includes and who it doesn't include. And I think that for the three of us who started that conversation, it was so rooted in young adult concerns. We've already heard that young adults are more transient. We are thinking about our identities in different ways. So sometimes that means that we're rejecting formal structures. And by the end of this discernment process as a body, we really realized that this was a concern carried by many more than just young adults. And that was a very important part of our learning process in New York Yearly Meeting. Because when we began this exploration, and even as early as we started this working group, we started hearing really concerned pushback about entitled young adults who are trying to change everything to meet their needs and not honoring long-held traditions. And that was just one of the rejections and concerns that was raised in the beginning. But we were definitely not on the same page. We, meaning us as New York Yearly Meeting as a body. And so we, the working group, embarked on this journey of deep listening. We hosted a number of listening retreats and brainstorming retreats, thinking about what membership means. And if we could just snap our fingers and change it tomorrow, what might it look like? And through that listening, we heard new truth emerging. We heard from people that we were not expecting to hear from. And one of the most wonderful parts of this experience was that we were joined by friends from Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, from Baltimore Yearly Meeting, from New England Yearly Meeting. And so we were really thinking about this comprehensively and able to think about, in our varying but similar traditions, how does this fit in? And we got to the point where we were ready to make a proposal. That was back in 2018 when the first concept was brought to New York Yearly Meeting. We have coordinating committees, and this was under one of our coordinating committees, and the resistance was loud. It was, how dare you try to circumvent our tradition? We're already struggling to get members in our meetings. Our meetings are already shrinking. How dare you make this proposal to potentially take people away from us, from our meeting structures? And so we went back to the drawing board, not from scratch, but really started quantifying the data and again, practicing that listening and thinking about what are the anecdotes and stories that we need to tell in order to bring people along, but also recognizing that we weren't quite sure that we were right at that point because the resistance was so incredibly, it was just there. It was salient. It was everywhere. And our job as a working group was not to decide this is what the yearly meeting needs to do. It was about listening to what was rising in our yearly meeting, which was a whole lots of different things. We went through this for almost 3.5 full years. And the turning point was that we had a full day of worship. We call them meetings for discernment. And it was a full period of extended worship in which membership was the only thing that we were talking about as a full body. And I guess we started at probably 9 a.m., took a break for lunch, and then ended at the end of the day, probably around 5. And the energy shifted so substantially as people's stories were being told. I remember offering ministry so I am a member of a monthly meeting. It has never really felt like home to me, but I've wanted to be a card-carrying Quaker. And just like lifting up the stories that this is something that works. It's not brand new, because there are all of these people. One of the things that became very clear was that we weren't trying to take people away from monthly meetings. It was about creating space for people who didn't find home in that space. And that is a much more powerful angle. And the more we talked about it, the more people we realized didn't have homes. And that those are parents with young children. Those are people who may be incarcerated. Those may be students who are at college and disconnected. Those may be people who found home in youth programs or in young adult programs, but never attended a monthly meeting. It could be caregivers, people who can't leave their homes. And it's been fascinating since the COVID-19 pandemic started, because a lot of the resistance that we heard many years ago has been sort of alleviated, because all of a sudden, if you have young children or you are a caregiver, you can call in on Zoom and be a part of that monthly meeting. And that it's just been a fascinating thing to watch. But also through this COVID-19 pandemic, one of the things that we did a survey of young adults. And in that survey, we found that almost 35% of the almost 100 young adults who responded to that survey, 35% did not attend or were a member at a monthly meeting. That is a huge number of people who do not have a home. And I want to lift up the fact that I learned so much through this process about the value of membership in a monthly meeting, in a local meeting. And we've seen that throughout the pandemic, especially, that monthly meetings have really been able to respond in wonderful ways. And there's this huge group of people that has been traditionally left out, or that could be left out, because there isn't a structure that exists for them. So that's what I'm paying attention to. Ultimately, membership in New York Yearly Meeting was approved last fall at our fall session, so last October or November. And I'll leave you with this idea. I went into that meeting with a lot of anxiety about how other readings and how other pieces of this work had moved forward and how contentious it had become. And when this particular faith and practice revision was approved, I don't know that I have ever been a part of a more gathered Quaker space, to the point that silence really, we held it for a really long time before moving on, because we had experienced coming together as a body that was more inclusive and more responsive. And it was an incredibly humbling thing to be a part of. All of the conflict and struggle in between, it really allowed us to deepen our faithfulness as friends. So thanks for the opportunity to tell that story.
Yeah,
Thank you all
thank
for
you.
telling those stories.
Amen. So yeah, let's move from the worshipful receiving of these stories, and I'm curious if anyone would like to reflect on, respond to, ask questions about anything we just heard from Tunisia, Katherine, or Marissa. Emma.
I have a million questions. Some of them are just grateful questions. Thank you for the three of you for putting out here where we can see it. And I'm glad to see that it's not going to be taped and available to people. Where we can see it, what people must have said and felt and thought on Pendle Hill in 1652. That is to say, who are we? Who do we want to be? How do we get ourselves to be our best selves as both individuals and a group? It seems to me that that's the attractive thing about this as a religious community. And so in that context, I'm wondering if Zach would let me ask a question of all three of these speakers. And that is, can you take about 30 seconds and describe what you think would be the ideal way of friends finding and meeting and supporting each other? Is that okay to ask, Zach?
Sure, yeah.
I have some notions, but I want to hear.
I think that one thing that I learned is that I'm not sure that there is an ideal. I think that part of what's challenging about having rigid structures is that it's not as inclusive of the unique experiences of friends for whom the ideal is different. So we talk to people over the course of our process who had been attending meeting for 50 years and saw no reason to become a member. That was their ideal. We talked to people who had been attending for 30 days and knew instantly that they wanted to be a member very quickly, that this was their home. That was their ideal. I think that one of the magical things about Quakerism is this concept of continuing revelation and experimentation, which allows for the ideal to be fluid, allows for us to create space for people to experience their truth and to define what belonging means for them. And I can't presume to know that for everybody. I can only know it for myself.
Did you have other ideas on Emma's question, Katherine or Tin?
Yeah, I think, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my Wi-Fi is like going in and out. I think that for me, when I originally was asked to facilitate in January about membership, I was like, wait, what? Like, what? This concept was super didn't make sense to me in a way that I was like, why is this something we're struggling with? I didn't realize membership was keeping people from being able to function in Quaker community. And that was on the ways, that is because of my lived experience of Quakerism. And some of the people who I looked up to the most as a young Quaker were folks who don't have membership or could not obtain membership or were not able to be this Marissa said, like card carrying Quaker. That sort of like, I am a Quaker and I can like claim this. And so I think we can create a dynamic in which everybody can be a part of the community in ways that feel good for them, but does not limit them to how they are able to function in yearly meeting. And with the entire Quaker body of Philadelphia yearly meeting. And I think it's really uncomfortable to like sit in that and realize that like sometimes structure creates harm, and that when we let go of that structure, we can create a space that facilitates growth and care. But I think that when we let go of ideas of how to maintain and control these sorts of things, we are able to build a community that is much more deepened in a spiritual practice of love and Quakerism and the spices and all of these beautiful things that are of many Quaker spaces. But I think it's a big creative shift that happens for the individual, and then the monthly meetings and the quarterly meetings and the yearly meetings, like it's a ripple effect that will happen.
Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. And thanks, Emma, for that question. As soon as you asked it, I just thought, I have no idea what ideal would be. I don't really have an answer to that. But I do have an answer to what isn't ideal, which I think is what brings a lot of us to this conversation in the first place. And as I said, I was very eager to have membership. It was only a few years. And about a year after I officially was recorded in my meeting, I was reflecting on a long walk with a fellow YAF at annual sessions. And I thought, actually, I know in my heart that one of the things that caused me, not caused is the wrong word, that brought me to the monthly meeting of which I'm a part. And this, I do not fault my monthly meeting for this in the least. And this is with all the support of the young adult friends community. I know that one of the things that led me to write my letter, even though I didn't realize it at the time, was that I didn't want to be another young adult who showed up for a few years and then disappeared. And like, that's ridiculous. That's not why we should join communities. And I didn't think that was why I was joining a community. But then a year out, I thought, you know what? That's actually part of why I am where I am. And like, that to me, you know, I have a middle to upper middle class upbringing and a friend's education, and, you know, came to a monthly meeting in a city with many meetings that I could go to as a current student at a prestigious university. Like, I am sort of the person like for whom these systems are supposed to work, like in their racist, classist state, like it, as with all that's wrong with them. And that's not working either. So like, yeah, I don't know. That's the answer I have right now. I have no idea.
Emma, did you want to share any more on that question you asked?
Am I muted or not muted? I'm muted. I'm not muted. The answers they gave were close to the answer I would give about who was it that said structure gets in the way of a good experience? Was that you, Marissa? That was okay. That structure gets in the way of a good experience. And so belonging feels to me to be so self-explanatory and self-designed. That is, I belong here. I know I'm home, so you guys will just have to deal with it, kind of thing. And the answers from these young people who are thinking it through are the answers that I both expected and celebrate. And it was nice to have them, to know that I was not off base with understanding a voice that needs to be heard. I guess that's the way to put it. It's interesting, though. I do have the question, and then I will shut up, I promise, and leave space for other people. I do have a question about what kind of pushback people got when they said, I'm here, I'm figuring it out, I'll let you know if I need anything. And that's what I heard each of you saying in your own different ways. I'm here because I need to be here, and I'm getting something here, and I'm bringing something here. Now, if there needs to happen, I'll let you know. And that seems to me is the spirit in which the relationship was begun those years ago. So, what kind of pushback did you guys get? And from whom? And then I will shut up. Thank you.
No, please keep talking. I'm enjoying yours and everyone else's participation. And I'm also aware that we haven't yet heard from Howard, Martha, or Mike, so I want to leave some space for them to contribute. But Marissa, you had raised your hand.
So I actually have a list in front of me of the document is called Your Questions and Concerns Answered, which I'm not going to read, but I think that there might be value in just reading the questions. And then the reason I had my hand raised was because I want to give a little plug for membership not just disappearing. So some of the concerns and pushback that we heard were things like, monthly meetings are the basic unit of our society. Doesn't that mean that membership should always be there? What happens with all of the other practices that are linked to membership, like marriage and religious education and transfer of membership and blah, blah, blah. Our monthly meeting has never heard people say this before. Where is this coming from? To which we responded that the people for whom this new pathway is most relevant to have not found home at a monthly meeting, and therefore you would not hear from them. That one's not relevant. I joined a monthly meeting and membership has been so important to my experience as a Quaker. Why would we make an exception to our practice? Are the people seeking this new form of membership trying to circumvent our traditions? That's verbatim from somebody. Won't this take people away from our monthly meetings, which are already struggling to find members? Does this mean that members of the yearly meeting will eventually become members of a monthly meeting? What does accountability look like for members of the yearly meeting? How do we know that they're in good standing?
Thank you.
Yeah, so those were some of the things that we addressed. And I just want to lift up the idea that membership in a monthly meeting is a sacred tradition, and it is a practice that I don't believe should be going anywhere. We need to think about how to reimagine it. But the reason why membership became a thing to begin with was because there needed to be a home for people who needed help when they were suffering. It's very hard if you are not a card-carrying Quaker to some degree to claim conscientious objector status if there was a draft. And there are many other things, not the least of which is that when membership works correctly, it is a sacred union between a person and that community. But I am not certainly proposing that we throw out all traditions and just go willy-nilly with all this with no structure.
Did you raise your hand, 10? And then Martha?
Yeah.
Go,
Oh,
Jen.
I've spoken if Martha wants to.
No, you go ahead. You follow.
I think Thank you, Marissa, for sharing all of those statements. I think two things are coming to mind with your question, Emma. I, one, am thinking a lot about the ways in which our conversations about membership and our Quaker communities align a lot with some of the hard conversations we have about citizenship and borders and immigration. And like the ways in which our smaller communities are recreating these bigger systems that are really harmful. And I'm also thinking a lot about who determines the accessibility of membership and who is determining what membership means. And if we're using these older ideals and traditions, who are they benefiting? And I think for me, thinking about my experience with membership, the first thing that came to mind was my ability to maintain membership with the Quaker Leadership Scholars Program at Guilford. And while there are then moments of navigating like an institution and like requirements of a student in a scholarship program, there wasn't space for the students and the members of that Quaker community to decide what their own spirit-led work is, right? And so I think that also comes into play with a lot of the stories I've heard from friends who have experienced pushback from their monthly meetings about addressing race, about addressing class, about all of these other things. Like that was a big reason why I no longer felt at home in my Quaker community. I was wanting our body to address these things. We're a bunch of young people in college. We have the resources and the time to be doing this. And I think the pushback, again, just continues to come back to these systems that we are trying to understand on the grand scale. And I think it could be a lot easier if we understand how we are recreating them in our smaller scale communities here.
Thanks, Ten. Martha, and then Howard.
So lots to say and lots to think about, and really appreciate this. I have two main things I want to say, and one is to lift up the process of discernment and even extend that to the notion of clearness committees and the clearness process, which truly is discernment on both parts. And I would add that the organizational nominating process falls in the category of discernment. So in the answer to Zachary's first question, what would we think about Ujima Peace Center, and young adult friends, my feeling is that if a yearly meeting has approved these interest groups or focus groups or projects, and people are active in those programs, the group itself could discern that this person is a member in good standing of Young Adult Friends or the Environmental Working Group or Ujima Peace Center. And that should be good enough. I would be totally thrilled with that. I don't think discernment only rests in the hands of or the processes of a monthly meeting. And that to me feels like a genuine holding up of our tradition, but just changing our mindset about who and where does that discernment take place. So that's one sort of reaction. Emma, that would be my ideal that we could work on. The second one I want to make has to do with friends organizations and our the governance structure. And a couple of you, and Ted, you just mentioned how you were part of the Quaker Scholarship Program at Guilford, and this relates to that. I've been a distributing trustee of the Thomas H. and Mary Williams Shoemaker Fund, and our group has administers by the foundation, a private foundation that was established by Quakers, brother and sister, Thomas and Mary. And over the more than 50 years that it's been in existence, it's probably given out $10 million, mostly to Friends organizations. And the trustees of that group now are quite concerned about the growth and vitality of the Religious Society of Friends. And so we funded a number of the things that we've talked about here today. The joint project of New England and New York yearly meeting on vitality in several different ways. Quaker Voluntary Service Project, Quaker Speak, various programs that have met at Pendle Hill and the Pendle Hill Scholars program. I don't have that name quite right, but you get the picture. This and one of the things that the Shoemaker trustees has said, we care about growth and vitality of the Religious Society of Friends, and how will we know if these grants have been effective or successful? So we've pushed to say membership is one of the criteria or matrices that we want to look at. What's the data? How do we know this is effective? And Mike, it was interesting to see the annual reports from Quaker Voluntary Service, in which they demonstrate that they survey their alumni to say, where do you fall on this, where do you self-identify on the Quaker spectrum? You know, slightly interested, becoming more interested, very interested, have found a meeting. And I think that's really helpful to require us, and Marissa, you mentioned too, getting data to support positions or arguments, or how do we know what we're able to do? I guess the last thing that I want to say is that we Friends have spawned a great variety of really incredible institutions, schools and colleges and retirement communities and peace and social justice programs. And till now, most of them in their governance structure require a certain number or proportion of people to be members, card-carrying Quakers, to serve on their boards. And and they do that because they both want to ensure that on some level their programs and their organization is being run in ways that are consistent with the beliefs of Friends, and they want to have a connection with the Quaker community. They feel like, in a way, they're serving Friends. So how would, and I remember at the January threshing session, we talked about, the Friends who have just been able to check the box, I'm a Quaker, I'm a member of a meeting, so therefore I'm eligible to serve, even though I don't go to meeting and I don't care about discernment practices or whatever. And that's cut both ways in my work with various organizations. There have been some people, fabulous board members, who just happen to have never been weeded out of their home meeting, so they check the box and it works. There are others who have been so involved in the service on the board as an ad hoc member that they've gone on to join their local meeting. So there's a link there that I would want us to consider, and I think we can derive strength in both directions. I think that the questions of becoming a more diverse and more representative body, more our decisions are better, our programs are better when we bring our differences in background and experiences to shared space. So I think this is a very timely topic and discussion, and I hope we can help us think more expansively about this this pathway, so that more people can. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a expansive project. Talk too long, Howard. It's your turn.
Thank you, Martha, and I want to just reflect on three different models. One is our current model, and within Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, we stipulate in Faith and Practice that membership is owned and operated by monthly meetings alone. That's going to have to change if we're going to consider the other two options. And I don't know how that change would occur, but it's going to have to change. New York Yearly Meeting has offered an additional pathway through yearly meeting membership, but both the monthly meeting pathway and the yearly meeting pathway involve deliberate actions taken by the individual and by the body. And both provide assurance that there will be mutual commitment and mutual support. What I hear from the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting YAF group is something quite different and radical and exciting. And it is, as I would put it, a shift from thinking about membership to thinking about inclusion. What they articulate is that membership is a collective expression, and I'm reading more or less from their epistle. Membership is a collective expression of the fact that our community knows you, the Spirit is within you, and we acknowledge you. So the action is still twofold, but the action of the individual is to be committed to one group or another, to the spices that Ten referred to. But it's a matter of affirming and acknowledging by the group that a person is included. So I think that in the Q&A section of the New York Yearly Meeting process that Marissa, she read the questions. There is in the answer to one of those questions, I believe, a reference to 1737, a great day only a couple hundred years before my birthday, which was 1937. Anyway, in 1737, according to this account, membership was first formally established. And I hope Emma will come back to this. I've been imagining what happened before that, from 1652, roughly, to 1737. And what I imagine is something more like the YAF idea than either the monthly meeting formal process or the yearly meeting formal process, because both involve deliberate steps, clearness committees, committee approvals, application letters, stuff, right? And it seems to me the inclusion model that the YAFs are recommending is very different. It's a model in which the community affirms and acknowledges that some individual is a committed and engaged friend. And that's it. That's all that's required. Oh my phone is ringing. So I'm done here.
Emma, I don't know if you wanted to respond, and Mike, I know we haven't heard from you yet, if you had any. And Katherine, I saw you raise your hand.
I do want to respond. I also don't want to take up all the air in the room. So why don't we hear from Mike, and then I'll respond if nobody else is taking the space.
Sounds good.
Thank you. I think it's important to take a step back from the issue of membership to look at what is it that we're trying to do here, because I think there's multiple things, there's multiple goals that are all connected to the idea of membership in a way that in pursuing one goal, we might unintentionally eclipse another goal for what membership might be. There is sort of an institutional value of knowing who's in and who's out. Who's a stakeholder, who's willing to stay connected and supportive when the going gets rough and we really need somebody to be here and hold space for the work that we're doing. That doesn't have to be membership. That question doesn't have to be answered by the idea of membership. If an institution like a yearly meeting or a college or some other board has an expectation that a certain number of people will be members, then part of what membership means is we think this person is qualified to do that kind of work, to be on the board or to be on the committee. That's not necessarily the question that people are asking when they turn to the community and say, am I a member? They're not necessarily asking, am I qualified to be on the board? What they're asking is, am I in the circle? Is there a relationship here that matters? Is there love that connects us in a way that we can formalize somehow so that I can say, I'm one of you? And so part of what may be helpful in moving forward is to break open the structures in a way that there are multiple structures that can work towards accomplishing multiple goals. What's the structure that we use to say to someone who is either distant but wants to stay connected, new but wants to jump in right away? What are some ways that we can say, we're so glad to see you, we love you, we want you to be part of our community? And how might that structure be different than a structure that says, who's qualified to represent us on boards or committees, where currently membership is the standard that we use to decide that threshold? Okay, I want to hear what Em has to say, or somebody else.
Yeah. Emma, then Katherine, then Tunisia.
Okay. What Mike had to say comes close to what I had to say, which is that membership is kind of like marriage, in that you say, I think of a Quaker marriage as a three-way connection between two human beings and the divine. And each human being is saying, I'm here with divine guidance. I'm going to try to stay here. And that there is a level of, will you be here when the going gets rough? That membership, from the member's point of view, answers that question. Yes, I'll be here when the going gets rough, or at least I'll try to be here when the going gets rough. And that's one of the pieces for it. Another piece that, and I'm not saying that that's what membership should do. I'm only saying it's one of the ways I think about membership. Another thing that comes to mind for me is the whole James Naylor story. when James Naylor walked into Bristol and sort of reenacted the whole Christ walking in, the holy, holy, holy. Friends looked at him, and in fact, Fox looked at him and said, "Your doing that doesn't represent who we as a group are." And so, partly for me, and this is my own personal hang-up, partly for me, I'd be uncomfortable if someone said, I hate the president because I'm a Quaker and he's not nonviolent, so I'm going to go shoot him. And then come back to us and say, I'm a Quaker, and that's what I was doing because I'm a Quaker. I do appreciate having a membership committee. I've been a member of the Lansdowne Friends meeting since the 1980s, and we've never turned down a member. So, but I do hope that someone would say to that person, here are some of the things that Friends have long stood for, social justice being one of them, nonviolence being another, recognizing and seeking a divine presence in other people. That these are the things we have stood for. And to have you come into the group and say, oh, the devil lives among us. There's the devil in us all. And I'm okay if a person comes into the group bringing that, but I'm a little less okay and kind of restless if someone goes out of my meeting and says, okay, I'm off to kill Trump. I'm a Quaker. I'm a member of Lansdowne meeting. And my meeting is behind me. I don't know how we deal with that, but I can see some of the, I'm here when you need me, as Mike has suggested. And on the other side, people in the meeting saying, I've spoken with this person. We as a group have had a discernment process with this person. And it's our feeling that the portion of the divine that's in this person is palpable. This is not to say that I think we must have membership. It's only a way of saying that I can't remember now who said it. Maybe it was Marissa, that there's so many pieces to this story that I hope we'll go on talking till we get to a good place with it. That's what I'm saying. Eventually, Fox and Naylor, Fox looked at Naylor and said, oh no, he's not one of us, and ran up and down the street saying, he's not one of us. Eventually they healed, and Naylor came back into the fold, but it wasn't easy. And it was, to me, a reminder of the possibilities, both positive and negative, of membership and group discernment. I now really am done, Zach. I really am going to shut up.
No worries. And thank you.
Actually, I'm not going to. Okay. 1737 was when birthright friendship happened. That's the point that Mike was raising. 1737 is when the Brits said, you don't have to do anything. And American, in the 1660s, had what they call a halfway covenant. That is to say, you didn't have to believe in God, you just had to have parents who did. And that we knew that eventually if you had parents who did, you would too. Birthright friendship came into Britain in 1737. They said, you don't have to be a member, but if your parents are Quakers, you probably will be one too.
Mm-hmm. And we've, Philadelphia Yearly Meeting laid it down in the 90s. Am I correct?
Yep.
So we don't actually have a formal birthright membership anything anymore. But Katherine, did you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Howard, what you were saying about the Yap epistle, and what both Mike and Emma said, I think underlines this. Our epistle I appreciate your kind words. Our epistle, in my view, describes a vision more than it describes a structure. And like, I don't think you could just take what's in our epistle and put it in Faith and Practice and hand that book to a new person and say, this explains all about what membership is about. Like, that's not, and how to, do it. Like, that's not what we were writing, and I don't think it works that way at all. And also, I think, like, well, young people have been carrying this concern and everything, but the YAF community is not a perfect model of inclusion. Like, we have a lot of work to do. And so it doesn't, I don't think we should just like say that the YAF epistle represents the most radical, perfect vision for what membership should be, because that would be a really unfair assessment of how things are.
Thank you.
Tunisia?
Yeah. I think when Mike, you were speaking sort of about, and then this theme has continued, like becoming one of us and like becoming a part of this group. Like, what is this doing? It's a bit serendipitous. This journal I'm like scribbling in while we're chatting was a journal I used to annotate parts of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I was paging through it and saw a note I made from the writing that says, when we humanize, we also dehumanize. And so I'm curious, like how, when we membership, how do we demembership, I guess, in this way of when we are granting membership, when we are granting and accepting people in, how are we making other folks who have not figured out how they want to be a part of, like a lesser than member of our communities. And I think that comes in this space of, Emma, you were mentioning like feeling uncomfortable with people who are saying like, I'm going to do this thing and my whole meeting is a part of it. Sort of, I've felt similar ways in moving through a Quaker institution and seeing things that the administration does, and saying like, I'm a Quaker and I'm doing this stuff, and me being like, what do you mean? This is super un-Quakerly. Your decision-making process is not welcoming discernment, not welcoming all these ideals and practices that we use, and find myself struggling with that idea of, yes, I would be very uncomfortable. I have been very uncomfortable with people saying I am a part of this community and doing harmful things. And, that doesn't mean that they are not a valuable member. And that doesn't mean that their I don't want to use the word membership, but their participation in the community isn't bringing something, or isn't welcoming more opportunity for learning for the entire group. And so I just wonder, I guess, from the whole group of us here, what does it mean when we do grant membership to those folks who don't have access to that, when we're thinking about a new vision, if we want to maintain membership practices in relationship to other practices that allow people to be a part of it but aren't necessarily members because they don't know if they want to be. Like, how do we undo that hierarchy of membership as humanization and not membership as dehumanization? I'm wondering what y'all are thinking. Yeah. Sorry to moderate now, Zach.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's like, I'd like to push it even one step further and say, one of the complications of membership that is brittle, that is based on, you're a member if you think this way, or you're a member if you do this thing like we do it. Part of the trouble with that is, like, let's take the spices. If on one of part of the spice, let's say the peace testimony, if someone starts to question, are there times where it is appropriate to respond to violence with violence? Even if they start thinking that question, if the glue that holds the community together is we all agree about this, then just creating space for someone to question their own thinking about something is dangerous to the cohesion of the group. Because now they're thinking about something that's the thing that holds everybody together. Which seems counter to the idea of not only how do we accept people, but how do we accept people as they grow and change and they start to think differently about something in the future than how they thought about it in the past. So I think you're asking the right questions. I'm not sure I have a good answer for you, but I think those questions apply not just to people who are in membership and out of membership, but people who become members and then start to change their thinking or change their practice, like, can I still attend monthly meeting because of distance or because of my mobility or other issues that might make that more difficult for them?
Howard.
Yeah, I did take the YAF epistle as a vision, not as a worked out model. But it did seem to me a vision moving in a direction that might help reimagine the kinds of commitments that people make when they join our community. Join sounds like membership. And I was just trying to enter into that reimagining and think of some way that would not seem to, at least some folks, to be a barrier, an obstacle to engagement and participation and a sense of belonging. And it occurs to me that there is, with the idea of an alternative or additional path that New York Yearly Meeting has now approved, there is the question as to how New York Yearly Meeting will make sure that there is not a sense of status difference or a different level of engagement that people identify. I'm reminded from what Emma was saying about birthright membership that years ago when I was on what was called representative meeting, there was brouhaha over an action taken by the then General Secretary, and two women in front of me said that wouldn't have happened if he had been a birthright friend. And I leaned forward and said, bullshit. But be that as it may, there was among some people a sense that birthright members were more fully and authentically friends than convinced friends. And I would hope that as New York Yearly Meeting moves forward with this, and if Philadelphia Yearly Meeting adopts something similar, we would do well to consider how to avoid any kind of notion that people who follow one path rather than another are somehow not fully or authentically Quakers.
Thanks, Howard. Emma, did you have something to say?
No.
Okay. We are coming to the end of our time, but I see we could have a few more comments. I don't know, Marissa, did you want to say more?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we said over and over and over and over again throughout our already long process was the fact that we cannot think about membership exclusively in terms of an additional thing that we need to do or creating a new pathway, or there is a lot of work to be done related to membership as it currently exists in our monthly meetings, and it's deeply flawed in lots of ways. And so in a lot of ways, what we were able to come to unity on as New York Yearly Meeting was a recreation of what we already had within a different structure. We were not able to shift our holistic understanding of what membership means, which we named as something that we would like to explore moving forward. And if you look at the two sections of our membership in Faith and Practice side by side, the wording is almost identical, with yearly meeting substituted for monthly meeting in all places. This was the safest way for us to go. And there were many other far more radical proposals that came up that really served to disrupt the dysfunctionality of monthly meetings, at least some of those stories that we had been hearing. And I think it's important to name that sometimes it's the concept of membership that's flawed, and sometimes it's the pathway that's flawed. And we need to be talking about both of those things simultaneously and recognizing that they only intersect sometimes. They really are two different conversations. Something that Mike said is like, there's this thing that holds everyone together in a monthly meeting, and there's something really powerful and also something challenging about that. And I just want to name that sometimes the thing that's holding us all together is oppressive or exclusive. And we have blind spots often that do not allow us to see that, because we are pretty homogenous still. And we have a lot of work to do in that area. And I name that because I think we use words like inclusion and belonging, and it's so important to name that belonging and real inclusion are not the same thing as fitting in. And sometimes we welcome people into our structures, and there's this process of like assimilation to, or this need to assimilate to how things have always been, where really for me, and this is me talking, my understanding of membership is that it's a three-way relationship. It's a relationship between the individual, the meeting structure, and God. And our call is to tune in to the God that is within all of us, the divine that is within all of us, and allow for that to spark and fuel the continuing revelation that we're talking so much about, which means that there might be disruptions to the status quo, which we may not see if we do not truly become inclusive. Yeah.
Thanks, Marissa. Any other last final comments before we wrap up? Emma?
I just want to say thank you to the next generation to help keep alive what is a spectacular discussion. And I'm about to have a new grandchild. I look at these half dozen young people and I think, oh, the world she lives in it's going to be all right. Thank you.
Mm. Mm.
That includes you, Zach.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, this is just we are right at the beginning as Philadelphia Yearly Meeting in holding space for this discernment about membership, and it is definitely going to call on us to look at not only the layered way in which membership gets expressed, and the overlapping issues that it calls us to examine, but also for us to be in relationship with our ancestors and with those who came before, and and to also begin to start thinking of ourselves as future ancestors, and about what sort of world, what sort of foundations we want to be building for the next generations. And that's a very powerful thing, for sure. So this, as I said, this will be posted to the web, and there'll be a plenary session on Sunday, July 19 from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m., focusing on the topic of membership, commitment, and belonging. And all of those, I know that not all of you will be able to attend that session, but those of you who can, I think we'll probably set up a brief Q&A moment at the top for y'all to respond to a couple of questions from the people in attendance based on this discussion and other things. If you can't make it, that's cool. But that's what's up next in terms of our process as a yearly meeting. And we're doing our best to facilitate this discernment in an ongoing way while we are all forced to work remotely, virtually, because of the pandemic. So with that, why don't we close with some more worship? And thank you all very much. We'll be back in touch soon.